say anything else, I've been asked to give a special welcome to Raquel Nagrayo, who is from the Brazilian Workers' Party. So very, very warm welcome to you, Raquel. Just trying to see. Hi, yes, I can see you.
Hi.
I'm glad you really pleased you could join us. That's fantastic.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm just here like 2 years ago in UK, so I've tried to follow.
That's fantastic. You could come.
You're very welcome.
You certainly are, and big welcome to everybody else who's come. So, this evening, so I'm just going to go back to the notes. Give us a moment. We seem to stand on sorts of pinnacle regarding the Labour Party. We've had this meteoric rise under Jeremy Corbyn and the kind of the uniting of all sorts of shades of left opinion under this one umbrella. Since then, there's been a systematic attack within and without the party to destroy democracy in the Labour Party and to undo all the things that that Jeremy brought in. So we've seen systematic attack after systematic attack. Where's my list? There we are. So we've had the leak report. We've had the sackings of the shadow cabinet. Corbyn's been suspended, and then now loads of people are leaving the Labour Party. So the question now is that the right thing to do or not? People are starting up new groups. Other people are determined to stay in the Labour Party. And for some of us, it's staying and fight if you can. So Carol's going to lead off this evening. I don't know how long you want, Carol. Do you want me to time you?
Yeah, so it's about 10 minutes because I'm just doing like an introduction to
all
discussion tonight, Pam.
I apologise if I've done it for you. You'll do it.
Don't worry.
I'll give you till 15:15, all right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Carol.
You tell me when to shut up. Right, well, thank you very much and good evening, everybody. My name's Carol Buxton, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the chair of West Ham Labour Party. We've got about 2,500 members in our Labour Party, which is quite a big number for a small geographical area. And the West Ham is very significant to the Labour movement, and that's because of Keir Hardie. He was the first Labour MP and a founder member of the Labour Party. And he's, you know, even though a lot of people around here may not know a lot about history, that people have heard of Keir Hardie. He was an ordinary working man and his history is fascinating. He actually left school when he was 7 and by the age of 10 was working in a coal mine. And he wore a cloth cap in Parliament. He didn't wear a top hat. He wore a cloth cap and he was vilified in the press for doing so. Contrast that to another Keir, Sir Keir Starmer, elected leader of the Labour Party in 2020, privately educated, went to Oxford, peer of the realm, became the Director of Public Prosecutions, and has only actually been an MP since 2015. And he was elected this year on a unity ticket. He said he was a socialist, he wanted to unite all parts of the Labour Party. And of course, the story has been the exact opposite of that in reality. So the Labour Party was born with a Keir, and the question is, will it die with a Keir? And I believe that's going to be the case. So I want to just say something about being in the Labour Party and what it's been like for those of you who are not in the British Labour Party. It's always been very frustrating. And as Pam indicated, it has been a bit of a roller coaster. And really over the past 4 years or so, it has been a constant war between the left and the right. And in all honesty, you know, when Jeremy became the leader, almost by mistake, actually, you remember the right wing thought they'd let him on the ticket. just to show the left how rubbish the left were and they wouldn't get anywhere. Well, then he became the leader. And the membership just exploded. I can remember one of the first meetings, big public meetings that Corbyn called in Islington. I turned up 2 hours beforehand, which is very unusual for me because I'm not known for my punctuality. But I knew there was going to be a lot of people there. And actually, the queues, in the end, I just went home because the queues were so huge. There were thousands of people there, literally thousands, inspired by the thought of a socialist as leader of the Labour Party. And the membership was composed of lots and lots of youth and of older people like myself who felt, oh my God, there's a chance in the Labour Party for some socialist ideas. And of course, the roller coaster goes down as well as up. And there were huge political failures. A failure to tackle and reinstitute some sort of democracy in the Labour Party, particularly around the reselection of our MPs. And then Pam mentioned the leaked report, which showed the Labour Party staffers who had blocked Corbyn, blocked the leader's office.
Right, okay.
Had sorry, can't hear you, Pam. Shall I just carry on? Yeah, okay.
I just said, can everybody mute if that's not speaking, please?
Thank you, thanks. The leaked report really exposed the party officials, of which there are about 420 of them, and that grew really as the Labour Party grew. That the number of staffers grew hugely, and they behaved in an appalling way, blocking Corbyn, blocking the socialist policies, acting in the most undemocratic way, presiding over suspensions, stopping their own people being suspended, not investigating complaints they didn't like the look of. There was huge capitulation to the Parliamentary Labour Party. You know, it's like a triangle. The pimple at the top seems to be absolutely able to get away with anything they want. And so you had MPs like Jess Phillips who said they weren't just they wouldn't stab Corbyn in the back. They'd stab him in the front. Nothing happened. They could get away with doing all of this. You could stand in Parliament evidently and shout in Jeremy Corbyn's face, calling him a effing anti-Semite, and nothing would happen to you. And a lot of very good socialists, including very high profile names, people like Chris Williamson, Jackie Walker, Mark Wadsworth, which is most probably in my book the worst example of throwing your friends to the wolves. Now Sir Keir, and I always call him that, I don't call him Keir Starmer. I want everyone to remember that he's a peer of the realm. That Sir Keir, now his leader, is presiding over the right wing's claim to get their party back. And we're now in the midst of a purge of the left. And Jeremy Corbyn was suspended for for telling the truth. A bizarre old world where you tell the truth and you get punished, but you stand and tell lies and you get rewarded. So he said that following the report by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission a week or so ago, he said that reports of the number of cases of anti-Semitism were hugely exaggerated. And it shows you how confident the right wing have been and are in purging us. There's a real witch hunt going on now. I'm going to be very careful with using that term. I use it deliberately because it is a witch hunt, and it must have felt like this in McCarthy times in America. Recently, in a report, I was accused of anti-Semitism, a report carried out locally into the Labour Party. What I had done was I had liked a Facebook comment that protested against what was called the witch hunt against Chris Williamson in the Labour Party. Because they used the term witch hunt, that was considered an anti-Semitic trope. This is how bizarre it has become. And I've written down what the report said. Anti-Semitism in this Facebook quote is seen as entirely invented by Jewish critics for a dishonest ulterior motive. That relates to claims that women were witches, and that is also a claim that has an ulterior motive and is untrue. I mean, can you believe how tenuous the link is and how ridiculous it has become? But this witch hunt is unlike previous witch hunts. It really is much more vicious and based on spurious grounds, as some people in the audience this evening will know, because they will have been themselves suspended or expelled from the Labour Party. We are told what to talk about now. That's also something that has changed quite dramatically. Bristol North East had a resolution that supported the reinstatement of Jeremy Corbyn, and for that, on Thursday, I believe it was, they were suspended. The chair and the secretary were suspended. And then their comrades locally set up a hashtag saying, sack the regional director. And for that, they've been suspended too, but for bullying this time. So Bristol South followed suit. They wanted to give £3,000 to the local food bank charity and to Acorn, which is, I think, a renters charity, renters union, and they were blocked by the same regional commissioner. So if we stand up, what I'm trying to say is if we stand up, we're going to be cut down. That's the reality of the Labour Party. There's also a huge dribbling away, and the NEC elections showed this. Also, I should actually say at this point, congratulations to Roger, who did extraordinarily well in the NEC election. He didn't win, but he came very high up in the voting. So congratulations to you, Roger, because you've used that as a brilliant platform.
Carol, you've had 15 minutes.
Right, I'll just sum up then and just say that there's a lot of dribbling away. The NEC elections actually were really interesting because it showed you how many members there were in February and how many members are now, and we're down 60,000, almost 60,000 members. And you know, if you give up your membership of the Labour Party and give up your paying in your subs, as it were, you normally have a 6-month leeway, so that figure is likely to be much higher, you know, given when we come to the new year. So I just really like to remind everybody that I said at the beginning about the youth, the way the hundreds of thousands of young people came into the Labour Party because of Corbyn, and the prospect of a new way of living, of getting back free university, better housing, all of those promises that we had, the promise of Corbyn. And now in London, during the NEC election, in London, the total youth vote was 1,660. That's how far it's fallen. But we have to remember that the Labour movement is more than the Labour Party. It's the trade union movement. So, I mean, I'm not prepared to put my neck on write a suicide note and let David Evans, the General Secretary, expel me because I think Jeremy Corbyn should be back in the Labour Party. We're going to put motions through our trade unions and our Trades Council. But the most important thing that we do locally in our area is get involved in grassroots campaigns. We're involved in, you know, a huge number of us in campaigns around housing, against development and gentrification, in support of immigrants, in support of schools, fighting against academisation and against cuts. And we know that in our area, Brexit, in an area where there's huge poverty already, that Brexit is going to be really, really hard for us and hurt us. So we are in an unprecedented economic downturn, and we know that the working class are going to move. They're going to move forward. We don't know what it's going to be over. We don't know what form it's going to take, but we do know that capitalism is failing humanity. The Labour Party, with its move to the centre, has no solutions for us. So I believe a split is coming. What it looks like and on what basis, what the scenario is going to be, I'd like to leave that to discussion and to hear views of all the comrades here, particularly comrades who are in other countries, who have a different sort of experience, and how our new Labour Party, Socialist Labour Party, can be formed. Okay, thank you, comrades.
Thanks, Carol. I think that's a really excellent introduction. I think there's probably excuse me, a lot of experiences to be shared here. I'd like to invite people to come in. You don't have to make a 5-minute speech. You can make a remark and you can ask a question. So I'm hoping that the conversation will flow fairly fluidly rather than long speeches all the time. So that's my suggestion for this evening's format. Would anybody like to kick off? If you just if you all know how to do it, if you put your hand up in the participant box and I'll spot you. Nobody yet. Does anybody want to ask Carol a question? Or does anybody want to ask anybody a question? Roger, I think that was your hand. Was that your hand going up then? No?
It was tentatively. I wanted to come in a bit later, but I do want to speak at some point.
Okay. But
if nobody else wants to, I'll speak now. But
nobody's indicating at the moment, so you go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, as comrades in Britain would know, I did stand for the election to the NEC. I did that. I was standing not just against the right wing, but I'm afraid against the left as well, against the official left, the so-called grassroots voice, which had, I'm afraid I can only say, stitched things up. They didn't allow, they decided at a meeting, a private meeting, where they excluded what is at least the second biggest of the left groups within the Labour Party, which was the Labour Left Alliance, of which I'm a member. And anyway, it meant that I was battling more or less on my own, me and the other comrades of the Labour Left Alliance, one of whom is here, by the way, Carol Taylor-Spedding. And I think we did extraordinarily well in the circumstances. As far as I'm concerned, I got, it was a single transferable vote, which was a bit complicated, but it meant it went to 37 rounds, and I got as far as round 30, which is a lot further than I expected. I won nominations from 65 constituency Labour parties. I got a total of 3,473 votes, but even better than that, 2,072 of those were first preference votes. So, and that was on the basis of standing on a full-blooded socialist program. So I'm very happy about the results, especially also when you take into account that there were 6,000 votes that were annulled, and they would overwhelmingly, if not unanimously, have been left votes, because there were people who resigned in protest at the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn. And I mean, I'm not going to do a Trump. I'm not going to say that this is electoral fraud and that it's fake news, although I'm tempted to. But nevertheless, you know, I think in the circumstances, it's not a question of personal pride. I'm proud on behalf of the fact that there is a proper heartbeat of a socialist tradition still there in the Labour Party, and it made itself felt despite all the obstacles. Now, what I want to say, though, is something about, you know, what Karel started by talking about the current witch hunt. And I do think the word witch hunt maybe is sometimes abused a bit. I think it was perhaps a little bit overstated when there was a mass purge of members from the Labour Party in the 1980s and 90s, which was when people were being expelled, but they were being expelled for being Marxists, for being for being Trotskyists, or for organising as a tendency within the Labour Party, and it was deemed to be unconstitutional to organise, which is of course completely false and completely hypocritical. The right wing organises, but you know, there is a long tradition of left wingers who've been expelled from the Labour Party. Stafford Cripps was expelled, and he later became Chancellor in a Labour government. Michael Foot was expelled, and he later became leader of the Labour Party. Nye Bevan was expelled at a certain time. And my own father, who was left Labour MP for 33 years, on 2 occasions was had the whip withdrawn, in other words, was expelled from the Parliamentary Labour Party, and so on. I mean, there's a long tradition of lefts who've been victimised simply for putting forward left oppositional views within the party. But the reason why this is so much more disgusting and so much more outrageous is that to accuse socialists of being racist is about the most vile insults that could possibly be made. And there is absolutely no grounds whatsoever for it. And it's a witch hunt exactly in the same way that the original witch hunts were. The hunts of women in the 16th and 17th centuries for being witches. In other words, completely false allegations, and where there was no right of appeal, if you like. There was no right of no means to defend oneself. One's accused of it, and one's already condemned for it. And that's what has happened with huge numbers of genuine socialists. There might be some people who are anti-Semitic in the Labour Party, but to most of the people who this accusation has been hurled at, it's been absolutely a travesty and absolutely outrageous. So why is it? I mean, this witch hunt is so much different, if you like. I think it's because at that time there was a movement against the left because you know, they had the brief leadership that was held briefly by Michael Foot, and the right wing wanted to reassert itself, and so they started a whole process. But it took some 10 years before it reached the stage of the New Labour takeover. And New Labour was, I would say, a completely alien takeover by the party. It was it removed the socialist clause from the Labour Party constitution, clause 4. It completely altered the whole structure of the conference and all the rest of it. And it was accompanied, as I say, by a vicious campaign to expel left-wingers and all the rest of it. But now what we're seeing is the same process, but carried through at a breakneck speed. It's like a bit like a kind of Keystone Cop silent movie. It's just the most wildest, the most ludicrous smears of racism. And I think the reason for that difference is because Blairism had a certain, it was able to, it had a certain success because there was, it was against the background of an upswing in the economy and a boom. It was possible under the new Labour government, although it was in many ways it was continuing the policies of Thatcher, but under a different name. But I think the difference is that it was able to introduce reforms at the same time. For instance, the minimum wage. For instance, although on a privatized basis, but an investment in the infrastructure. The Good Friday Agreement, which made concessions to Irish nationalism and so on. But today, we're having the same process, speeded up and gone to the most grotesque and bizarre kind of lengths, but against the background of what is looming ahead as the biggest slump in history, when serious bankers and capitalist commentators and economists are saying not that just that it'll be as bad as the 1930s, but they're saying it'll be as bad as the slump of 1709, believe it or not. And with a looming trade war, and maybe even spilling over into hot wars here and there. And with not just this pandemic, but the likelihood of new pandemics and maybe even more deadly pandemics coming on the basis of the agribusinesses which are eroding the natural habitats, and we've explained all this, we discussed this at previous meetings, and of course with climate change, with the catastrophes of kind of horror film dimensions, and even talking seriously and soberly of the threat of human extinction. And at the same time as well, with the sharpest kind of polarization in social struggles and class struggles, with vicious authoritarian regimes springing up around the world, but also simultaneously with uprisings worldwide, something again we focused a lot of attention on, whether in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe, in Belarus, and so on. So in this context, what hope is there for a Blairite so-called middle way? I would say none whatsoever. And that's why I agree with what Karel was saying, that the likelihood is that the Labour Party will split on that basis. And I just want to say one thing about that, though, because there are many people talking now about, oh, well, I mean, as I've already said, there were 6,000 people who resigned from the Labour Party, probably a lot more than that, or who've let their membership lapse. But there are also, there are people who've been suspended or expelled and who are talking about, well, we need to create a new party. Well, I just think it's important to sound a note of warning about that. I'm sorry if I'm going on too long. I just want to make one serious point about this, which I think is very relevant at the present time. There are many people talking now, well, we need a new party. What's the point of staying in Labour? Well, first of all, I would say that the best riposte to a leadership which is trying to get rid of the left, one by expelling people, but also in the hope of demoralizing thousands more and making them leave voluntarily, that the thing to do is say, well, they want us out of the Labour Party, right, I'm leaving. That is not a rational response. It is not, it doesn't make sense. But when we talk also, when we see also the history of the last 80 years is littered with left groups that tried to leave the Labour Party and fizzled out into nothing at all. In 1931, the ILP left the Labour Party. That had an irreplaceable place in the traditions of the Labour movement. It predated the Labour Party. It was the first Labour organisation, Labour political organisation in Britain. They had 16,000 members when they left, and very, very quickly they fizzled out into a sect. More recently, we had Arthur Scargill tried to create a breakaway from the Labour Party in the mid-90s. And he was somebody who led the biggest industrial strike in British history for 60 years. And he, again, his party, nevertheless, despite his charisma, it fizzled out very, very quickly. It never took off at all. We've had more recently George Galloway tried. Now he's somebody, whatever you think about him, but he did win a by-election against Labour by a huge majority. Now in this situation, you see people who had real public persona and real basis of support when they left, because they didn't leave on clear issues, and because they weren't. Because it wasn't based on a mass upheaval within the party and the trade unions. I won't be long, I promise. They ended up with nothing. So, for instance, now recently Chris Williamson, who's somebody I like and admire very much, but he's talked about creating a new party, and I believe he's linked up with another failed breakaway party called the TUSC. But I mean, it's impossible to imagine that that could actually become a mass party to rival the Labour Party. But what will happen is when millions of people, or at least hundreds of thousands of people, move into action because of events in society. There won't be a split because Jeremy Corbyn was suspended, just as there wasn't a split when the 5 ILP MPs had a dispute with the Parliamentary Labour Party on an obscure issue about standing orders in Parliament. It would come because of mass unemployment, the kind of things we're talking about: mass unemployment, starvation wages, the fact that youth are doomed and have got no future, no hope under the present circumstances, the brutal attacks by the state and by the police. Those are the kind of issues which could create mass movements and which could lead to splits. It's already happened even fairly recently, within living memory, if you like, that the RNT, the Rail Union, and the Fire Brigades Union both left the Labour Party in the 90s. Len McCluskey of the biggest union, Unite, threatened to create a new party as recently as 2015. He said that if the Labour Party doesn't honour its commitment to the unions, the trade unions and the rights of workers, then they'd create a new party in opposition. And that could happen. And that, I think, is the way that things will develop. We have to stay firm. We have to keep our place and keep battling on. It's not the first defeat the left has suffered. It's only the latest. And we have to stand firm, put up our policies, put our point of view, maintain links with people who left or been suspended, so that they're not just lost to history and to the movement. But I do think that that Carel is right to look to a future, and maybe not in the very distant future, of a mass split and the creation of a new trade union-based party, which will meet the needs of the youth and of the 0 hours workers and all the people in society who are crying out for some kind of political lead. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. I'm sure there'll be time for you to come back in later. Anybody else want to come in at the moment? Otherwise, I was going to say something. Oh, hang on. John and Dominic, you come in next, please, or whichever one it is got your hand up. Do you know how to unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry about I can't stick the hand up electronically because it's a borrowed iPad and I don't know how to work it.
I'll show you sometime.
After lockdown.
Okay.
After lockdown.
Well, comrades, it's partly to follow on from what Roger's just said. The way my thoughts are going is this, that my brother and myself wrote a letter to Sir Keir Starmer shortly after he became leader because of what we considered his lacklustre approach to the present crisis, to the pandemic, and also to the economic developments that would flow from the pandemic, i.e. mass unemployment. And we said that we thought he was really lackadaisical in his approach. And that has been my feeling. The media and commentators on politics talk about Sir Keir Starmer being clinical and incisive in his parliamentary you know, sort of dealings with Boris Johnson. I see him in anything but those terms. As far as I'm concerned, I think the big, if you like, test will come when the Tories present a budget that will stem from, you know, the situation we're in now. And given the history of the Parliamentary Labour Party over the last 5 to 6 years, and given Keir Starmer's present political stance, I see that the Parliamentary Labour Party, in one form or another, will probably opt for an abstention on that budget. Austerity budget. And that budget will be severe austerity. Boris Johnson indicated some 3 or 4 months ago that there would be a big review of the care system and the fact that carers were, if you like, totally under appreciated, with 0 hours contracts, with minimum wage, etc. And yet they were in the firing line. They were the ones in the care homes or doing, if you like, home help care. They were facing some of the worst sort of conditions. They were facing, in many cases, severe illness and deaths. And he's done absolutely nothing about that. All the talk a few months ago was we're never going back to the old norm, the old normal, that people who were valued, i.e. shop workers who were maintaining things, that a lot of the gig economy that were maintaining things, and the care workers. And as far as I'm concerned, I think that's when the big, if you like, upheavals will come within the Labour Party, because if you like, when it comes to big business, they will be talking about the need for investment and the need for big business to have capital, and therefore Boris Johnson in the past has indicated that he sees the way forward as tax cuts for the rich. So from that point of view, while there may be thousands of people leaving the Labour Party, there are still tens of thousands remaining in it. And unfortunately, because of lockdowns, because of the pandemic, if you like, the normal activity and meetings in the Labour Party are not taking place. Once we get back to some sort of normality through, say, a vaccine or what have you, things begin to ease up, people begin to meet. That's when, if you like, the debates and the discussions will take place. I think myself, as far as the smears and the expulsions for so-called racism come, I look at my own area, and the only person that I've ever come across that was seriously described as an anti-Semite was Sir Gerald Kaufman. Now, Gerald Kaufman went back, 50, 60 years in the party. Many of his family died in Auschwitz, and he was a Jew, and his big crime was the fact that he took on the Israeli government and its disgusting treatment of the Palestinian people. And he said he was spat on in the synagogue, he was criticised in the Jewish Chronicle, and quite frankly, I think as far as all this anti-Semitism is concerned, much of it is the criticism of the Israeli government's treatment of the Palestinian people. So I'll just leave it at that. But I think the next budget is going to be the crunch, because I think it'll be an austerity budget, and I don't think Keir Starmer will be, and the Parliamentary Labour Party will take it on. And I'll just literally finish on this one. Why the hell they had to change the slogan for the many, not the few, and come in with under new leadership sounds like as though they've taken over a failed second-hand shop. Anyway, I'll leave it at that, comrades.
Thanks, John. Carol Taylor Spenning, I think you were next.
Thank you, Pam. a couple of points. I was quite disturbed to see that only, I think, 27% of the Labour Party actually voted in the NEC elections. You know, that to me, that smacks of being disenfranchised, feeling, I think a lot of left-wing members have felt, well, this is ridiculous. We've had the leaked Labour report and no action done on it. We've got people being suspended or expelled left, right and centre for absolutely nothing. And it seems to me that the traitors and the right-wing cabal at the centre of the Labour Party are totally in control. David Evans is strangling all discourse, all debate, and trying to shut down all debate in the Labour Party. I don't see how we can come back from this. I'm fairly new to this, so I haven't lived through this before, which I know many of you will have done when, you know, Blair and New Labour were in power. But I mean, if the Labour Party is in such a state that thousands of people voted for Luke Akehurst, then goodness gracious me, you know, where are we going? Where are we going with this? I find that absolutely shocking that I'm in a party now that can actually think that Luke Akehurst represents the workers, represents the Labour Party. I just find that absolutely shocking. Now, Roger's mentioning a big split. But at the moment, all that's happening is people are being picked off one by one. Starmer is a member of the Trilateral Commission, the only MP who is. They are firmly against democracy. They want schools and universities to produce compliant, biddable young people. It's a really suspect organisation. As far as I can see, all he's done is prove to the establishment that he's a safe pair of hands to take over when they finally get rid of Lyra Johnson, because obviously things are not going too well there. So I just see Starmer as coming in, parachuted in to take hold of the Labour Party, get rid of the Socialists, get rid of the left. And now he started with Jeremy Corbyn and loads of others. So I am very disheartened about what is going on, and I can understand how many left-wing members are now leaving the party because it just does not, with Starmer in charge, it is not representing what we believe. And he is suspending and strangling any debate through David Evans, any debate on these issues. If you speak up and speak out against the witch hunt, against all this ridiculous things that we've heard about people, the ridiculous charges that are being brought against them, and if you say so, then you're immediately suspended. It seems to me that the right wing and the establishment, through Keir Starmer, have got an absolute vice-like grip on the Labour Party at the moment. And I'd like to know how on earth this grip is going to be released, and how we're going to release the left wing, the socialism, back into the party. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carol. We have got 3 people waiting. Oh, I wonder if comrades would mind if I spoke next, because this is obviously relevant to what we're talking about. Is that okay? Yeah. Well, as comrades probably know, I'm now a sole responsibility. I now hold sole responsibility for bringing the Labour Party into dispute with my anti-Semitism, as explained in the EHRC report, which is an absolutely ridiculous. I don't know how they've got away with putting it in, because it's absolutely logical. It doesn't make any sense. And the examples that are given are not anti-Semitism. The only reference to anti-Semitism are the ones they put in. But this is how, as an older Labour Party member, 5 years ago, I agreed to have my name put on a ballot paper in what I thought was a Tory ward, and I really didn't expect to get elected. And I only put my name forward because of Jeremy Corbyn. I wouldn't have dreamed of it otherwise. So I then did get elected. As comrades may or may not know, I've been absolutely bullied and harangued by the Labour Party for almost the whole of the time I was in that position. I was suspended and investigated and reinstated once, and then not very long after was suspended and then fast tracked out of the Labour Party on remarks that were not anti-Semitic. But one thing I did just, I'm actually taking legal action against the AHRC now, and I was asked to dig out all the paperwork from the investigation. One of the things that appears in the investigation, I'm discussing Marxism, and it appears in an investigation. I have to explain myself, and I think that's an example of what they're really driving at. They want to crush all free speech, so that and frighten people into saying nothing. And I'm not prepared to let that happen. But I think it's worth mentioning the absolute vicious campaign they've had against me. It's absolutely appalling. It's shocking. And I'm only one of many Labour Party members in that position. Nonetheless, I would still rejoin the Labour Party if I could. I absolutely think I have a right to be a member. You know, if I have any success in this court case, I shall be applying to rejoin. Well, that's all I wanted to say now. So shall we move on to Finbar?
Can't hear you, Finn. Turn your sound on.
Unmute yourself, Finn.
Sorry. Yeah. It's a matter for the members of the British Labour Party to decide what's the best policy to pursue. And it's very interesting to listen to the experiences of the comrades who have spoken when they talk about the indignities they've had to endure in the Labour Party. I was a member of the British Labour Party for a few years, the same branch that Roger was in Barons Court in West London. Now I live in Dublin, and I'm a member of the Irish Labour Party. But I want to raise a matter of an international nature. The big advantage the comrades have with regard to the British Labour Party is this. The British Labour Party exists. The Italian Socialist Party is gone off the agenda, even though its founders were Marxists. The Greek PASOK Party is gone. The French Socialist Party, after Hollande's government, has been totally discredited and is struggling to be relevant in society at all. The German SPD, all the parties I refer to are all members of the same organisation as the British Labour Party. The German SPD has been so discredited in its coalition governments with Angela Merkel that its future is hard to predict. The Spanish Socialist Party, the PSOE, again with a Marxist tradition, a Marxist background, is struggling to be relevant, even though they're in government in Spain. In Ireland, the Irish Labour Party, in the most recent opinion poll, got 4%. That's more or less a large bus queue on Saturday afternoon. Like 4% for a national party founded by Connolly, James Connolly in 1912. So when I say the British Labour Party has at least the advantage of existing, that's a relevant point to make. And the British Labour Party is not just based on the trade union movement, its foundation is also in the cooperative movement, in various mass organisations from time to time, such as the Indian Workers' Movement was also in the British Labour Party. So it's got these traditions and roots, and there's also the possibility of a Labour government. Now, we talk about the splits and so on, these points are very relevant for the British comrades, but I'm raising these points of a more general nature, because at least you have the advantage of a party that can struggle to form a government, a party still with roots in the movement, and a party that won't disappear. Unlike internationally, there's so many parties which were founded around the beginning of the last century who no longer are relevant or even exist. Now, I'm raising that from an international point of view because it's important to consider that the things that are happening in Britain, the attack on the left, was also part of the other parties across Europe as well. The expulsions, the disqualifications, all these issues, the lack of democracy and control by the national bureaucracy have affected all the parties of the old Second International, or as it's now called, the Socialist International, and what it's now called in Europe is the Alliance for Progressives and so on, which is a ridiculous name for socialist movement, but they're all in that same organisation, and the flaws and the problems that have been pointed out by the comrades here exist in all of these parties. So I'm only raising this point just not to give any advice to anybody. It's not for me to decide what needs to be done, but just to show that what's happening in Britain is not unique, and what decisions you make in Britain with regard to the activities of the left in the British Labour Party have implications right across Europe. And I conclude on the point I began with. the main advantage that the British Labour Party has over our party in Ireland, or the Italian party, or other parties, or the French Socialist Party, is that it exists and that it's relevant in the minds of the workers in Britain. Be that critical or not, it does exist. So I'm raising that point to give an international kind of flavour to the general discussion, which is very interesting and very useful and very informative. Thank you, comrades.
Thanks, Finn. Thanks very much, Finn. I think it's very, very useful, actually, to have comrades from outside the UK coming in and giving us their impression of what's going on. I think that's actually very, very valuable. So please, if you're not a UK resident, if you're joining us from abroad, please don't hesitate to come in and say, what your impressions are of what's going on. But having said that, we've got Themos Nets. Would you like to come in, Themos?
Yes, thank you. Well, I am very hesitant in commenting on what's happening elsewhere, especially in Britain. And I'm encouraged by the latest speaker, Finbar, talking about the international aspect of all this, because it's true that it's not something unique that is happening in Britain. We have lived through it in many countries, and certainly Cyprus, we did in a different sort of way, but essentially it's the same thing. Part of the working class not being able to formulate a way forward. And when it does it for a very short period of time, and then something happens and the whole thing turns sour. And the situation in Britain now is really bad. And it's bad as a picture from us from outside as well, who had something to hope for. But I think that the last thing we need now is just another party. And we should start thinking what we can do, because all these thousands and thousands of Labour Party members who disappointed are leaving. They cannot just be convinced to stay in the Labour Party and fight. They just had enough and they are going out. So while on the one hand, I would certainly prefer everybody to stay in, and I would fight for anybody who could stay in. At the same time, we cannot stand there just looking and seeing what's happening and seeing the grip that Starmer and his bunch have on the party at the moment. Just try to convince that something will happen and something will change or a split will come. That's not enough. I think we should find a way to speak to all these people that are looking for a way out for the left. And speaking doesn't mean convincing them in our ideas necessarily. I think one thing that we should do is try to create a forum for all these people to express ideas, develop, hopefully what we think should be the way forward. But it doesn't matter if they develop independently their own ideas and their own way forward. The essential thing is to stop looking at each other in a hostile way. Just find a way to build links with all these people, because things are going to start happening, as has been already mentioned. Capitalism is in dire straits. It cannot go forward. It cannot do anything for the people. So explosions will happen, not only in Belarus or in whatever countries of this sort, or in Poland or etc., but Britain and the United States. We have seen all this. It is going to get harsher and harsher, and we have to see opportunities in that as well as dangers. And I think this is the time to really discuss and put ideas on how we go forward. One thing also I should like to say, we shouldn't just try to solve big theory and how we are going to lead the revolution in the future, but just try to see what sort of policies a mainstream left party could put forward to answer the questions of today. This is not something that is secondary. We have to be seen. We have to give the impression and to show that we are in contact with the present situation, and it's from here that we start and go forward. Of course, we have our theoretical future, but that's not the only thing we have. It's a way to go there that is important. It's the old question of the transitional program, but it's not in the normal way that the Trotskyist sects have tried to put it forward. It's not something to lure the workers from today to the revolution. It's something to make the workers think and ourselves think about the real policies that can be implemented today. Thank you.
Thanks, Temos. That's fantastic. Just looking at the list, we've got 1, 2, 3. We've got 7 hands up now. So, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask comrades to try and keep the remarks to about 5 minutes, so we're not going to get it in the time. And I'm also going to prioritise 1 or 2 comrades. I know. I'm not going to take it in strict order. So, can I ask Raquel to come in now, please?
I think I'm mute now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So thank you for the invitation again. And with all of the discussion, I had a kind of deja vu when I started to make part in the movement in Brazil, when I was in the university. And in that time, I was trying to talk about like my experience there, because in that time Lula was got the government, was in 2030. And was a huge discussion because the collegation, and I was in a group which was like Fourth International, and we were not agreeing with the collegations between the laborers and the right-wing party. And was this discussion, we should leave the laborers or not leave the laborers. In that time, a group left, was recent that time a big group left the laborers, and this discussion from this group was like, the laborers is not helping. There is lots of we do not agree with all of things happening. And within my group was more the discussion that even the laborers has all of the problem, all of the issues. And we are trying to do the discussions between everybody in the group, in the party, even that is like the majority is more central or more lots of opportunistic people going to the Labour's party in that time because got the power. Lula was in the power, so we were discussing even the issues. The workers still have lots of illusions in the Labours, because the Labours was the only party which could help the workers in some way because the history and the experience and everything. So in today I look all of the consequence which happens in Brazil. I don't know if you have been following the politics in Brazil, and it's very hard to see the consequence of the colligations between the Labours and the right wings, and then the people who left the Labours, and now is like a kind of, the Labours have to fight with the right wings and even with the left wings, like in a kind of disputing elections and everything. And this opened the area or the camp or the disputing for the right wings, and Bolsonaro got the power, and everything is much, much worse in Latin America. So I'm not, I'm not recently, the last 5-6 years, I'm not really within the movement, like active part of the movement, but still I remember these discussions, and I really rely on labels because I think it's the history is very important. It's not one day you just like form a group outside and then the things happening. So I think because of this, all of those news groups formed, living labels around the world, they just like end really quick because there is no history and there is no direction, and it's really hard to see like in a short time. It's just my contribution. Sorry.
Thanks very much, Raquel. That's brilliant. Right, Trish, can you go next, do you think? And then I'm going to call Nick in after that.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think contributions have been really helpful because I feel very much like Carol, and well done, Carol, as well as Roger. I feel like Carol, I feel like we're being strangled, and it feels kind of quite hopeless because of the way we're being strangled. But then I listen to Finbar and I feel actually, yes, the fact that we exist within a party that has the gravitas that Raquel was talking about, the gravitas, the stuff that Roger tells me regularly, and what I need to hear regularly, because I get despondent, angry, and I want to break out and go, oh, that we can't do anything, we can't say anything, we can't respond, we're not allowed to speak. We've got a general secretary and, you know, Stasi types, you know, Sir Keith, as he's called on Twitter, Sir Keith, which makes me laugh. But the fact is, this kind of control of our movement within is really frustrating, and it feels kind of hopeless. So I'm really happy when I hear the bigger picture from you people, and I recognise how important it is for us to keep that connection going, because we would just disappear and dissipate into the ether. But I will say, and it's very upsetting to watch, is there's thousands of people leaving, not just 6. They are hemorrhaging out the door, and they are hemorrhaging in a really sad way. They're really angry. And John Ryman was saying, why did only 27% of people vote? Well, I don't know the answer for sure, but I will say lots of people didn't vote because they didn't see the point. They didn't understand the vote, would have been another reason. Arguing amongst the left about which 6 to go for, making it quite complicated, also already complicated and then overcomplicated by different lists. And then people thinking, what's the point? It's Starmer. With the loss of Corbyn was the loss of hope. And Corbyn he made mistakes, and he continues to make mistakes, I don't doubt. But what he brought to us all was hope. And when hope goes, it's bloody hard. It's hard to engage, and I'm still engaged. But, you know, my family, my son left ages ago, my partner's about to leave probably, and I can't stop him because I've got no real answers. And I find it quite difficult to help. I say to people, we must stay and fight. And they say, how? You're not even allowed to speak. You can't even put something in your CLP. You're not even allowed to talk about anti-Semitism and before you get expelled. And yeah, that's true. And my last point, and it's an important point, I really want to raise it, is I actually think that the EHRC is bullying Pam. I think they've doxed her. I think they put her at risk. I think that they put her name all over the country and potentially internationally. The right-wing, I would say the right-wing movement that would also include perhaps very, hyper-Zionist movement would and could seek her out and be very, very, that could be really frightening. And I think it's really bloody awful that that we've got what's called a government body of sorts that has been allowed to bully somebody, an individual. They've named 2 people in that, pretty much, Corbyn and Pam. And I think that we should be terrified that they've picked on one ordinary human being and they've said, let's just say her. Let's say her. And I don't even think it's because, Pam, they've decided that was the only two they could find. The fact is, I've said stuff that you've said. Lots of us have said stuff that you've said. They picked you as one person. And they picked you as one person because they're reminding us all how we could be the one they pick. I think it was a very, very clever way of saying, do you want to be in this situation, guys? Keep your mouth shut. Get out of the party and keep your mouth shut. And I think a hell of a lot of people are keeping their mouth shut. And we all need to stand with Pam. And I would really like to see us all helping Pam fight this, because I think Pam has to fight this, really has to fight this. I don't even think, Pam, you've got a choice, because if you don't fight it, they're just going to pick the next person to frighten to death. And it's terrible that they've chosen, I mean, it's terrible that they do it to Corbyn, but then to pick just a member. I'm not saying you're just a member. I'm sorry, Pam, if I'm making you sound less important than you are, but you get my point, I hope. You know, you're a really important person and comrade, of course, but they have just picked you and said, let's go with this woman called Pam Bromley and let's make an example of her. And then everybody in the Labour Party who is going to argue about this, they'll be frightened. They'll be the next example. This is bullying. This is out and out bullying by the state or an organisation linked to the state. And I think we need to take this very seriously. I think this is really frightening behaviour from the HRC. I think it's really frightening behaviour. And I'm considering that the best way to fight it would be to go, before we leave in January, is to set it up, to go to the European Courts of Human Rights, because the European Courts of Human Rights are great. They're really good. They've done some great work. And I think European Courts of Human Rights need to be looking at our faux made up idea of human rights. And I think European courts need to be looking at this. I know they have no jurisdiction soon, although we don't have to come out of the European Convention when we leave Europe. They are a separate endeavour. I think we will slide out without ourselves noticing, but we should be taking it really seriously. And that's what I wanted to say. Sorry, I went on a bit long.
That's all right, Frank. Thanks, Trish. I suppose I should just reply to that. I am taking some sort of legal action. Chris Williamson's team and his solicitors are helping me, and he's put his legal fund at my disposal. So I will be fighting tooth and nail against it. I think the reason they've picked me up is because I'm a councillor, really. That's the only thing, a fairly unimportant councillor. But also, I want to apologise for anything. I mean, the Labour Party dragged me through investigations twice, and I won't back off and I won't apologise. The other thing, of course, is the two people that are named are getting on in years. I mean, I'm 66. Ken Livingstone's 75. So in actual fact, they're picking on two pensioners to bully, which is absolutely outrageous. But I think the European Human Rights Courts is a good thing to think about, maybe the next step along the way. But thanks for that, Trish, and thanks for your support. And it's everybody's fight, not just mine, isn't it? An injury to one is an injury to all. So moving back to the agenda, I realise some of you have been waiting quite a while to speak, but I do want to let some people come in that are either are fairly new or haven't spoken before. I'm going to bring Nick in, and after that I'm going to stop for a minute. If there's any questions anybody wants to ask that they want somebody else to answer, if they can just say so, not to make a contribution at that stage, but to ask some quick questions. And then I shall return to the list. Okay, go on, Nick.
All right, yeah, hi everyone. I mean, one thing, I think on the NEC election, people are sort of talking about the low turnout. Well, I think a reason for that is what the right wing of the party have always wanted. It's kind of like a passive, moderate membership. And a hell of a lot of those people joined up to support people like Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips. But I think they're the kind of people who probably won't think about voting in NEC elections. So I think that could be a possible reason for it. And I'm just making a point about the suspension of Corbyn. I think Keir Starmer got really, really lucky, because any kind of chance of an upsurge against that was kind of cut across by us moving back into lockdown at that weekend. So suddenly other things took over the news agenda, and I kind of personally saw a bit of dissipation of the mood that was building up. But I think more fundamentally as well, before the Equality and Human Rights Commission report was released, he was also under a bit of pressure. He was definitely being kind of outshone and outflanked by Andy Burnham, who was putting up a modicum of a fight, at least in Manchester. There'd been a significant rebellion on the on the Chiz bill when people like Dan Carden finally had enough of it and came off the front bench and put up some kind of real resistance on the overseas operations bill before that. So I think this is where he may have been losing the advantage a bit in, trying to shift the party irrevocably to the right. There was maybe there a little bit of a pushback, which has now just all been swept away by this. But I think for me, the way a kind of split in the coming period, the most likely way I can see it coming is the way the rules and regulations of the Labour Party are being redefined in the face of this assault by groups like the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and what I call, these sort of Zionist fundamentalist organisations, is basically looking to squeeze out any kind of legitimate left-wing discourse within the Labour Party by drawing it all up under anti-Semitism. You hear the arguments coming in that anti-Semitic discourse goes all the way back to Marx and can fundamentally be found in what Marx said about Cable. I mean, it's a complete misrepresentation of Marx, but that's basically what's gained some traction among these groups. So eventually they've put in these complaints again about people like Zara Sultana, Absama Begum, and so on and so forth. Soon Corbyn will be formally charged for some anti-Semitic offences or whatever, and they'll be saying anybody caught supporting Corbyn will be expelled. I think it's going to be at that point, really, when the test is going to come, and we're going to see whether more people are kind of frozen out of the party and form a more significant grouping that can then not formally leave, but at least point out that it's been victimised and create the beginnings of some kind of real resistance to, Starmer in Parliament and elsewhere. And I think that coming on the back of, the calamitous economic situation that we're going to face is, for me, the most likely way that the situation's going to move. So I just wanted to put that out there, really.
Thanks very much, Nick. Now, I'm going to bring John Ryman in next, but before I do, does anybody want to ask any quick questions or say anything quickly that perhaps won't take more than a minute? Who's not got that
question? That's what I wanted to speak on. Pam, sorry? I have a question that I'd like to ask.
Well, just hang on because you're next. Before John comes in, because you can start with that, can't you? Is there anybody else at all that wants to say anything or ask a question? And I don't mean the people who've got their hands up already, I mean everybody else. No? No. Okay, John, over to you.
So my question is what Carol had said about the low voter turnout really caught my attention. As far as what is the mood within the broader layers of the membership of the Labour Party. And Trish partially answered that, but I would be really interested in hearing some more discussion on what is the wider mood beyond just the left activists and so on. That's my question.
Okay, thanks, John. Peter Sinclair, you had your hand up a bit. Are you still here? Can anybody see Peter Sinclair? Has he disappeared? Peter Sinclair, do you want to come in now? Sorry, you've had your hand up absolutely ages. You need to unmute yourself. Where's he gone? Peter, do you still want to say something or not? You're muted. You need to unmute yourself. Dave, I think, I haven't got control. Could you unmute Peter, please? He's not unmuted himself.
Sorry, Pam. I've got a serious back problem.
Right. Okay. Sorry about that.
I've been sitting so long, I have to come back into the living room to recover. So I do apologise. Sorry.
It's all right. I'm sorry to keep you waiting all this time.
No, I'll just pass if you don't mind. Thanks. Okay.
Yeah. Fine. You go ahead now. Yeah.
No, sorry.
Oh, sorry, you pass on it. Right, that's fine. Don't worry.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay, it's fine, yeah. John Ryman, was that all you wanted to say, or did you want to say a bit more? Because I kind of cut you off a bit. If not, then...
No, as I said, I just had a quick question to ask.
All right. That's fine, John. Thanks. We'll move back to that. Right. I'm going to bring Ed Bober in now.
Thank you, Pam. I'd like to say, first of all, that we congratulated Roger for his excellent campaign. Carol Taylor-Spedding also conducted a very, very good campaign. She came to speak at my branch of the Labour Party in Morpeth. Roger was there as well. Made a very big difference to the political consciousness of the people that were there. Pam, Carol is not afraid to say things as they really are, to stick her neck out and to raise socialist issues, even when it's an uncomfortable situation. Now, both Trish and Carol have mentioned that, you know, the mood is down, they're feeling a bit disheartened. How do we go forward from here? The class struggle does not go in a straight line. We sometimes take one step forward, 2 steps back. The ground for our confidence is that the capitalist system can no longer serve to raise the living standards of the majority of the population in Britain, the USA, Belarus, practically every country in the world. In the past, in the 19th century, they might have sent children down the mines, they might have neglected health and safety regulations, they might have made our great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers work for a 16-hour day, but they could justify their system because it developed productive forces progressively over the decades. Even though capitalism went through booms and slumps, progressively productive forces, technology, machinery, science developed. And with that, and the strength of the trade unions, the living standards of working class people were a little bit better each generation. And the capitalist class were able to justify their horrific rule over society, even the wars that they forced people to go into and so on, because their system was playing a progressive role. From about the middle of the 20th century, there were massive booms, and that gave them an extra spurt. That was combined, of course, with substantial reforms, which were won by the trade unions and the Labour Party. But from the beginning of this century, certainly from the 2008 financial crash, it's become absolutely abundantly clear that capitalism can't develop productive forces any longer. And that's why, incidentally, they are, I mean, it's a sign of weakness on the part of the Starmer leadership that they have to accuse lifelong anti-racist campaigners like Jeremy Corbyn and Pam, that they have to accuse them of being anti-Semites. When Kinnock was expelling the left of the Labour Party, he was at least being honest about why he was expelling them. We're expelling you because you're selling Marxist newspapers. But they can't do that now, because the grounds for the policies that they claim to represent are crumbling. Look at President Macron in France. Only a few years ago, he was hailed as the glamour boy of the European left. He was going to rebuild the left and, you know, step into the footsteps that Tony Blair had created. And within months of him becoming president, because the centre ground have no way of solving the problems, he became a laughingstock of the whole of French society, with, you know, all kinds of protests, people blocking roads, blocking roundabouts, workers on strike, and so on. I mean, it's, you know, he's a president without any policy to take society forward, and that is the best scenario that could face Starmer, that he would become leader of the country and then find himself unable to do anything. A more likely scenario, or quite a possible scenario, is that he would go the way Kinnock did. Kinnock lost 2 elections because he was so busy expelling the left from the Labour Party. The grounds for our optimism are not to do with little manoeuvres and whether one extra person won or didn't win in this Labour leadership election. The grounds for our fundamental optimism, as Marx says in Das Kapital, every time the bourgeois delay the appearance of revolution, the conditions that are building up underneath the surface of society of revolutionary anger, of distrust of the ruling class, of determination to find a way of fighting back against exploitation, all that piles up. So every time they delay and hang on to power, it creates the conditions where an even bigger explosion of the working class will come at some point in the future. And there's no way forward for at the present juncture. There is no way forward. We've got a buffoon for a prime minister, just as the United States had a buffoon for a president. And that represents the best they can do, and our movement will grow. But I mean, yes, people at the moment, there's a whole load of people who joined the Labour Party because of Corbyn, because they thought, like the media portrayed, it's all down to an individual. Corbyn is a passing phase in the growth of a revolutionary movement in Britain. You know, there's probably 200,000 young people outside the Labour Party who've left in the last 6 months. And when a new movement begins, they'll suddenly remember why they joined the Labour Party for Corbyn. And whether that movement is a revival of the left inside the Labour Party or a new movement outside the Labour Party, it doesn't matter. They'll join it. They'll join it with a better understanding that this is not simple. It's not just about having. And by the way, this is to Themos. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn did have a load of policies like Labour's Green New Deal that would have created millions of jobs, building council houses. You know, a whole load of really practical policies that face day-to-day issues. But the next stage of the movement, the more thinking members of the working class will understand that it's not just about a leader, not just about policies, it's also about a strategy, a means for taking on the horrific brutality of the ruling class. And that, of course, means really the beginning of the development of a revolutionary party, which is what is coming in Britain. And it's coming out of this current situation that we're entering.
Thank you, Ed. Right, we've just, the only hands we've got, so I'm going to bring John Dunny next, followed by Jimmy Kelly. And we've no more hands up at the moment, so if you want to put your hand up to come in with another brief comment, that's okay. I'm planning to, Carol, do you want to sum up before we finish?
Yeah, I'll just have a few points to
all right, will 10 minutes be enough?
Easily, yeah.
Right, that's fine. Okay, right. Okay, go on, John Dunn.
Yeah, I think you've got to realise that the Labour Party is not the Labour movement. The Labour movement, as it exists outside the advances, and I think that's where the foundations are a new party, or a new movement perhaps, are being built outside of Labour. Groups have been existing. I mean, one, the All Grieve Truth and Justice. The Blacklist campaign is now in the middle of a public inquiry. It's something they've achieved without any help from the Labour Party whatsoever. The Shrewsbury Pickets have been campaigning for 48 years and have now got a judicial review. And all this is happening. All these movements, these campaigns have carried on irrespective of the Labour Party. And I think if anything happened that tied these movements together, together with the community movements that are already there, then that's where a new movement's going to come from. And as for the Labour Party, I've more or less finished with it. I'm still a member. I'm only a member because they tried to throw me out. And nobody, you know, I've been thrown out of better places than Labour Party. Well, what we've got is, when you talk about the Labour Party, I think we have to qualify that. This mass membership, and John Ryman asked about why only 27% voted in the NEC elections. That's quite normal. I think there are only 30% or so voted under Corbyn. And for all the thousands that joined, I used to go to our constituency and it were 20 odd people, the same 20 odd, some of them very, very odd, I might add. But in the coalfield areas where I come from, the Labour Party's died years and decades ago. It exists by a few councillors and the families who just want to keep getting their seats. And if you look what Labour councils are doing, forget, you know, are they all willfully implementing austerity and passing on Tory cuts? Some that I know very well, Barnsley, the height of the NUM militancy, the heart of the British coalfield, the councillors there, led by another sir, I forget his name, is so memorable, they're digging up public parks in working people to the latest, shiniest shopping centre that they're going to build in order for nobody in that area who's got any, people have got no money to shop in. Rotherham Labour Council, as well as covering up all the child abuse that was going on many, many years ago. My own campaign, we have an annual Orgreave rally because that's puts more obstacles in our way to try and prevent us holding things like that. It's unbelievable. And so we've got to accept, I think, that people don't really, in many former industrial areas, independents have been making inroads into all these. They lost control of Bolsover way before Dennis Skinner lost his seat. My own constituency of North East Derbyshire actually went Tory for the first time ever at the last election. People no longer identify in these areas. Genuine candidates who talked about the community, who organised on a socialist way, Labour had gradually been wiped out in these areas. And you know, and as for going along to Labour Party meetings, you might want to pass resolutions, but I've got better things to do with my time than sit through bloody minutes of the previous dog shit and things like that, and then wait till any other business to move a resolution about Jeremy Corbyn that'll then get ignored or whatever. My energies are in the movement, and as I say, the movement's alive and well, and people who are staying and fighting all the time for you, but link up with those people outside. Some of the best people are leaving. They're not going to join some revolutionary organisation. They're not joining Tufts. They're not joining George Galloway's Workers' Party. They're keeping their communities alive. And that's the embryo, that's the foundation of where the new movement and the fight back will start. It won't happen in Labour.
Thanks very much, John. Jimmy.
Okay, just by way of introduction, I'm a member of the British Labour Party, but I'm also a member of the Irish Labour Party, and I live in Ireland and I'm an Irish citizen. Irish citizens have a right under a very old rule to join the British Labour Party, and I took advantage of it and joined. I was allocated to a constituency known as Labour International. And Labour International has branches practically on every corner of the globe. The vast majority of them are people of British origin and British citizenship. But there are a few strays in there as well. Today, we had a meeting of the executive of Labour International, of which I'm very pleased to be a member. And with over 63, 65, something like that, delegates present. And it was an excellent meeting, absolutely excellent meeting, because it was a meeting where people were having a very, very cautious and a very wary approach, because they were conscious of the fact that there is an attack on the party using bureaucratic means, using Stalinist means, being passed down through the personalities of Keir Starmer and David Evans, the General Secretary. So people are aware, because some members of Labour International have been suspended and have been suspended for some time because they were left-wingers, and unfortunately because they got caught out. And the main way of catching people out in Labour International is because we all live on different parts of the globe. All our business is done openly, from executive right through to branch level. It's all done openly on Zoom. So there's no hiding place. You can't have private meetings and you can't have secret agreements. Everybody sees them. There's a conscious right wing in Labour International, mainly under the general title Labour Party Moderates. And these people have affiliations and relationships with personalities like Luke Akehurst, and promoted the cause of the right wing in the NEC elections. Despite the fact that some of the more prominent people, some of the more public brass-neck people were at the meeting today and probably recording the meetings to be used for evidence against us, a number of resolutions were passed. Some of them were critical of Evans. Some of them were critical of Starmer. Some of them were critical of the attitude of those people. But some of them were resolutions that weren't specific to a UK agenda. Like, for example, there was a resolution passed on Palestine in relation to asking Labour to recognise that the two-state process in Palestine is now 72 years out of date, and Labour has to move on to develop new policies. The interesting thing was, despite the fact that there was a weight on the meeting by the fact that you knew that the enemy was looking over your shoulder, all the resolutions that were adopted by votes in excess of 45 against the rest. 3/4 of the meeting voted for socialist resolutions, for anti-leadership resolutions, not personally slagging off Starmer or personally slagging off Evans, but slagging off, criticising and attempting to construct a new way to work in the party while expressing the criticisms and also expressing an understanding that the general membership of Labour International will not be lying down under the threats that are sitting out there. It wasn't a foolhardy meeting. People were cautious in the way they constructed their words. People were very careful that they didn't want to be held to hostage, but they were absolutely determined, at least the majority were, absolutely determined to continue to fight on. Now, the lesson I summed up out of it is that this means that as far as Labour International is concerned, the left is not defeated. And there is no justification in that situation to leave and go somewhere else. Now, one of the interesting things about the composition of Labour International is there's no middle-aged people in it. They're either old people or young people. The very, very few, the vast majority are pensioners, people who have been in and around the labour movement for generations, and people who have been in and out from the Kinnock days. Some people go back to active membership, back to Gateskill and back even to, It's the problem with your brain. As you get tired and get old, you start losing things. But the thing about it is, these people and the young people who are coming through are determined to hold things together. And the one thing about it is that there would have been a lot of people there who affiliation would have been to Labour Left Alliance, to the LLA. And there would have been a certain amount of disappointment that LLA sponsored candidates did not succeed in the elections in the sense of getting elected. But there was a generosity and a well-being and a very deep pleasure and satisfaction that 5 other left-wingers were elected, and that the right wing only got 4 elected from the constituencies. To me, like I left that meeting today very, very pleased, very satisfied, very encouraged by the fact that there was grumbling, the fact that there were moans, and to be able to read the lines on Facebook and that you might have drawn a mood, but from the people that were active, it was completely different. But there's one point I just want to try, and it might be helpful in relation to the question by John in relation to the low vote. The low vote is something that you would expect in a situation where, for example, in the Irish branch of Labour International, we have 160 approximately members registered, but there's only about 12 active. So the difference between the active members and the paper members, I'm sure, is paralleled right across the party. And it's not just the British Labour Party, the Irish Labour Party is the same. Very small active membership and a lot of paid in members. So I wouldn't be discouraged by that. I'd be more interested in what way the 12 people voted. But all in all, I would ask comrades to try and understand that what's going on in Labour International is good. And hopefully it's an indicator of what's there in the reserve of the rest of the Labour Party. And just leave it at that.
Thanks very much, Jimmy. So we'll have Jim next, and then David Hempson, and I think that will probably bring us up to summing up time. Okay, Jim, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Fine. I very much welcome and like these WIN discussions because I find them very full and frank, non-sectarian, and socialists can exchange their views honestly and their doubts. Now, normally when you say you have a full and frank discussion, it means you fundamentally disagree with everything that's been said before, and that's not true. But I do have some differences with some of the possible hopes and optimism. Now, if it's not going to sound too depressing, I found I agreed a lot with what John was just saying. I think the first duty you have is to speak it as you see it. And that's what I want to do. I'm very happy to be persuaded otherwise. And if I want to express the doubts I have with some of the points that have been raised. But just about, well, what I feel basically is I've seen this movie before. That's my overwhelming feeling. And just to give some background on myself is I've been a member of the Labour Party now for over 50 years. I worked 6 years full-time for the Labour Party. I was a councillor for 4 years. I've held probably every single position going in a constituency Labour Party at some time over the others. My views have changed, developed, adjusted, but I think the socialist values are constant. A strong supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. I knew Jeremy, we were fellow members of the same Young Socialist branch in North London in the early 1970s. He was a good comrade, a good friend. We would very much go out a lot of times together, meals around each other's places and so on. I don't think his fundamental values have changed, quite frankly. I think he's an honest, decent man. I don't think he tackled the anti-Semitism controversy in the party decisively enough, but he now seems to be being persecuted for what he actually says as being inappropriate. Not necessarily it's wrong, but it's inappropriate. And I think in all the years I've been in the party, I've been criticised for what you do, but I'm not sure I've ever seen this about what you think. That is quite extraordinary. It seems to me a development now. And as I say, I think I've seen this movie before. Back in 1983, when you had a left-wing leader of Michael Foot and the party went down in electoral defeat, the left was blamed at that time for a suicide, longest suicide note in history, I think was the comment that was made about the manifesto of 1983. But people said at that time, it was a setback, but wait, the big battalions of the labour movement have not been defeated. And everyone knew that the miners' strike would be absolutely decisive in 1984-85, and it was. And the miners could and should have won, but they were let down by others within the labour movement. It wasn't the end of labour disputes. There were other ones, obviously, of Wapping, and then you saw the poll tax movement, which in the end brought down Thatcher. But overall, it took 32 years before the left was able to have a major role within the party again in 2015 after 1983. And I feel it's unraveling as before. Now, it can well be, as other comrades have said, about the issues of the budget, and obviously capitalism is nowhere near in as healthy a position as it was with the neoliberal readjustment of capitalism after the implosion of Keynesian economics in the 1970s. And I accept a lot of what Ed was saying there about that long-term perspective and so on the party. But I'm not sure personally, and I'm getting on a bit now, like John, I've got the energy to go through all the internal battles of the Labour Party over the next period, and so on. Because I don't know how long it's going to take, and I'm wondering whether or not I'd be better with my energies of involving myself in other campaigns and other issues. I'm not going to leave the Labour Party. I don't think there's any future in any kind of revolutionary, purity, little tiny group or anything outside it, and I accept the perspectives that other comrades have given in terms of a long-term development. You need to link the issues together. You need a real socialist party, and that will come out of the struggles in the coming periods. But I think that I will probably remain a member of the Labour Party, but probably devote a lot of my energies elsewhere into other campaigns rather than in the internal battles of the Labour Party.
Thanks very much for that, Jim. And finally, David Hempson.
Well, look, it's a marvellous discussion, and it's all very first-hand because we know the people that are speaking are right there in the front line and fighting the battles in the Labour Party and more broadly in the Labour movement. I just want to make a few points about this struggle because of the international significance of the Labour Party and the British Labour movement throughout Africa, in America and in Europe too. You know, my upbringing, even though it wasn't in a working class family, you know, was to Britain. I mean, there's a strong cultural and political link, you know, with Britain. And the developments to the left of Britain are very closely followed by people in South Africa, in the unions, in the students and so forth. The rise of these shop steward movements in the 1960s created enormous excitement in South Africa and attracted us to the ideas of democratic development in the trade union movement and inspired us to organize the unorganized in South Africa. And we've then resulted in a movement which is a movement of millions and some of the largest trade unions in Africa. So, you know, that is the way in which we orientated, we learned, and we interacted. Sometimes we wanted to swear the TUC and the Labour Party for their lack of solidarity, but they were our brothers and sisters. We didn't always use the term comrades because sometimes they didn't really appear as comrades, but they were the people that we could look to and could actually move mountains when we had to, when we moved in struggle. Now, that's a beacon in South Africa and Africa and the enormous upsurge of interest in the Labour Party, and with Corbyn standing, and almost as an accidental factor, but it then became a real development, and the attraction of tens and then even hundreds of thousands of members into the Labour Party, you know, really caught the imagination of youth internationally and raised our hopes, you know, high hopes for a change in the colonial bastions, well, let's say the imperialist bastion, and throughout the former colonial world, in India and everywhere. Now we see that with the Labour Party leadership has in the past had catastrophic decisions, quite apart from the neoliberal program, which has led to the deindustrialization of Britain, which they, you know, not challenged. They've even had the catastrophic decision to lead Britain into the Iraq war and so forth. They've really pulverized the labor movement and caused, you know, a real reaction and disappointments. Corbyn raised the hopes high again, and we saw an enormous upsurge. Now youth internationally, workers internationally believed that another world was possible and the Labour Party would be part of the new world which is being constructed. Those are the hopes that are placed in this battle, which is sometimes a slugfest, a desperate battle here and there, complicated suspensions, all kinds of rule changes and the like. And this is the international significance of what is taking place in the Labour Party. So we stand firmly with the comrades that are fighting the fight inside the Labour Party, congratulate Roger on a marvelous campaign. We realize that battles are far from over and that the Labour Party will eventually face a dimension where it has to decide, well, the members will have to decide whether to stay with this old leadership or whether to make a clean break and to take on, put on new clothes, whether, you know, a genuine Labour Party of the working people. But that false moves, early moves, which actually splits away the left and leave the leadership in power in the Labour Party are not what we want to see, although we firmly understand, you know, the reservations, the points that have been made by those that feel they cannot stand and waste the last years of their lives, you know, fighting rearguard action. At the same time, we know that there will be new upsurges, and we were looking forward to seeing in Britain, as in America, as in South Africa, as in Zimbabwe, as in many other countries in India and elsewhere, an upsurge after, during and after the COVID pandemic that we are experiencing, and the possibilities of reconstructing a labor movement from top to bottom and creating the prospects for socialism. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I think that was a very eloquent summing up of the situation. Well done, and you stuck to your time as well. So thank you very much for that. So I think without further ado, I shall now return to Carol, who wants to make some final points.
Yeah, just very briefly. Thank you. I think I've learned a lot this evening, and from all of you, hearing you speaking with your vast experience. It's been wonderful. Thank you. So I just want to respond. John put a question about how are ordinary members feeling. I do want to answer that. And I'm going to answer it by saying, as we always say, that there are two parties in the Labour Party, two parties in one party. So the right wing are really, really happy. And the left, on the whole, are quite despondent and disappointed. But I think there's a key number of people in that second group that are resolved to fight back. And that is the position currently. I take on board everything that everybody said about the Labour Party. You know, that Starmer, Sir Keir's got a vast vice-like grip, and the witch hunt is an unprecedented witch hunt. But the Labour Party has lost many of its red wall seats in the north of England, the former industrialised areas, as John Dunn pointed out and others pointed out. But I just want to say something from being in the inner city areas of the East End of London. We're all not in the red wall, we're called in the black wall seats, because we've got very large numbers of members of our community or who are black or of ethnic minority backgrounds. And it's very possible, I think, that Labour can lose some of those areas where they vote Labour consistently and have never actually voted anywhere else. In my constituency, West Ham, we have never ever elected anybody other than a Labour candidate, ever. We have always had a Labour MP, amongst the highest majority in the country. And in fact, East Ham, which is a neighbouring CLP, does have the highest majority in the country. And those majorities actually are falling slightly. And it looks as though that trend will continue. Now, there was a report that was published, I think, on Thursday, looking at Islamophobia in the Labour Party. 57% of those people who were asked, Muslim people, members who were asked about Islamophobia, felt that Islamophobia was widespread in the Labour Party and they had actually been a victim of it. So, you know, things are not good in the Labour Party on so many levels. So what is Keir Starmer up to? Well, apart from a lacklustre, you know, question time with the Prime Minister is a completely lacklustre performance. So much for being a forensic QC. It's lamentable, his performance. I mean, the latest thing from Labour, when you've got Brexit a month away, where you have, you know, record numbers of people getting COVID, getting sick, the health service not able to cope in many areas of the country, looking after the poor, the elderly, the ill. You know, what's he talked about? He's put up a thing about the Labour Party wants people who put up anti-vaxxing propaganda on social media for it to be taken down. So, I mean, you know, that's where we are in terms of priorities. There aren't any real certainties in the future, except that we know that the crisis is almost upon us. It feels like you're standing on a beach and that tsunami's on its way. There will be such a huge outpouring of anger. There will be explosions in society. You know, the thought of mass unemployment of our local council, which actually is 60 Labour councillors, 60, are going to cut hot meals for children in an area that has some of the highest levels of poverty in Europe, not just in Britain, but in Europe. That is a Labour council. Homelessness is rife here, and there are lots of charities and organisations trying to deal with it, but it's the boy with the finger in the dike. Now, there will be huge movements in response to those as part of those upheavals. You know, Black Lives Matter, John Dunn mentioned the Blacklist campaign, the Orgreave campaign. We have had huge movements around Black Lives Matter against the privatisation of schools in this area. So there will be actions in this society by the TUC. There are unprecedented level of battles ahead, and I've got absolutely no doubt about that. I've got doubts about other things, but that I'm fairly certain it will happen. And again, there won't be any false early moves out of the Labour Party, clinging hold to some small sect with the hope of socialism round the corner. That's not the way it's going to be. What we're doing here is sticking inside, but orientating, as we have always done, to our class. We are rooted in our class, we are with our class, and we have it in our area and across the country to be seen to be rooted in the working class and to offer socialist solutions. You know, where are the leaders? Well, we are leaders. We are the people with the ideas and who can help other people to come to those conclusions that socialism is the answer to our problems. Thank you.